I think the current state of the U.S. economy is actually getting better rather quickly. And there's been so much written about what a terrible situation we're in, the depth of the recession, the length of the recession. Is it really the worst thing since the Great Depression in the 1930s? Yet we now have lots of indicators that things are getting better. Housing prices have stabilized. Housing sales are going up. Predictions now for the second half of the year in terms of real growth in the GDP are going up. And, unemployment is high. There's still problems in some of the credit markets. But I think I see it on the optimistic side. And I think by year end, people are going to feel like we have largely made it through the recession and begun a reasonably strong recovery. The most dominant concern in the United States is whether or not the recovery will be strong enough to address the jobs problem. A full double dip, I think, is unlikely because I think the banks have been stabilized. I think the credit markets have largely reopened. The Federal Reserve has basically said they would do whatever it took to not have a double dip. And so I don't think that's going to be an issue. Right before the American Thanksgiving. I think it's because the things that he's working on in Washington don't seem to be at the absolute core of what they're worried about. What they're worried about more than anything else is the economic situation and the recovery. And he seems to be talking about healthcare mainly. And he seems to be mainly talking about healthcare from a perspective that many Americans are having trouble relating to. It sounds like a lot of spending. It sounds like a lot of additional deficits. It sounds like a complicated new healthcare system. Many people are worried that the government will be overly involved in regulating healthcare. I think the legislative process is best when you learn as you go along. And we have a difficult fiscal situation. If it has to be somewhat smaller, then make it somewhat smaller. If it has to be somewhat more reassuring to those who currently have functioning health plans that they're satisfied with, then make it more reassuring. If you have to phase in some of the dimensions of it in order for you to be able to afford it, phase them in. And so I don't think it is, I don't see any reason to be negative about the notion that you changed your ideas as you went along, because the core principles here are clear. We want to restrain overall spending on health care. We want to cover people who weren't previously covered, and we want to do it in a fair and equitable way. My view is that he'll be just fine, that his personal resources are such, his intellectual capacity, his analytical capacity, his likability, that I don't think he's got just one chance to be high and then inevitably he's going to go low. I think if he scales back the healthcare proposal, I think if the economy begins to recover in the second half of the year, I think for the next 7.5 years, Americans are going to have an enormous willingness to consider and reconsider Barack Obama because they're fundamentally inclined to think that he was a great choice when they elected him president.